Okay, so hello guys. So today I'm back for yeah, sorry about that. So today I'm back for a Kings and Generals reaction. Sorry about tomorrow I won't be doing a reaction, and on Saturday I am doing a live stream to uh, to commemorate my 7 months anniversary for the channel. Well, you might ask, I started uploading videos only a few months ago. Well, I originally created the channel on December 10th, 2020. So I decided that every second Saturday, I will be doing a live stream, even if the second Saturday is on the 10th. I started be doing a live stream every month, second Saturday, basically. I'm doing a live stream for Hot Wheels. It'll be how I used to do it on my old channel, Race Table. So, but now we're focused on the Battle of Poitiers, which is one of the three astounding victories for the English during the 100 Years' War, along with Agincourt and Crecy, which we talked about yesterday. So yeah, let's watch. Oh, and I'll also leave a link to the original video in the description.
In our last video on the 100 Years' War, we covered the 1346 battle at Crecy, during which the outnumbered army of Edward III of England had destroyed the magnificent French force of Philippe VI, widely.
Oh, and I'll also leave a link to yesterday's reaction of the Crecy video. I'll leave a link to that too in the description.
Seen as the best military force on the continent. In the wake of this great campaign, the English king will pass the baton of command to his prodigious son, Edward the Black Prince. A chivalrous and brilliant yet brutal military commander, the Black Prince would meet the French at the second great battle of the 100 Years' War, the Battle of Poitiers in 1356.
And 1356 is also the time that Edward III is also king. So he's king from 1327 to when he dies in 1377.
Following the glorious victory of Edward III at Crecy and his capture of Calais a year later, the English, who had once been the most timid of all the uncouth races,
they were considered the second most timid, I'd say, behind the Scottish. I know the Scottish are consider themselves not to, but at the time of Edward II, yes, it was the English in pretty much all of Europe. Even states much smaller than it, such as Genoa, Venice, had much better armies. And but then the English beat France and it turned around completely, which secured, after the 100 Years' War and after the 30 Years' War and 7 Years' War following, it secured that Great Britain and then the UK would basically just rule the continent politically and geopolitically and all that.
Were now considered by Petrarch as the most revered warriors of Europe. Nevertheless, such glory didn't pay Edward's bills, and the war's massive cost convinced the king to withdraw from the continent and return to England after the Truce of Calais was agreed.
The Truce of Calais originally agreed to last for 9 months, but was repeatedly renewed until 30.
On September 27, 1347. Returning as a victorious conqueror, he celebrated the Crecy campaign with a tournament including all of the monarch's notable prisoners.
All the prisoners were David II of Scotland, Charles of Blois, the court of even a lot of Dunkerque,
displayed to all Edward's subjects as a mark.
And when David II was captured, I believe his son took power after that.
Of prestige. Over the Channel in France, the mood of Philippe VI and his subjects was entirely different. In December, the Valois king was castigated by his Estates General in Paris for his humiliating defeat.
And the Estates General is basically the closest thing France had to a government until the French Republic was set up. And that's what Louis XVI used, and that's basically what led to his doom.
defeat and wasn't allowed to raise taxes. However, the shock defeat and prospect of capitulation to the English forced France's proud aristocracy into agreement. Together, they would fund a great invasion of England to end the war for good.
Yeah,
Orders were immediately issued and
they wanted to do that, but it never happened. And ever since William the Conqueror, no other country has invaded England. I mean, not the England or Wales or Ireland, actually. Well, if you count Scotland invading, but we're not including Scotland in that list. So, yeah, pretty good. It's a navy which kept them afloat after the 1500s.
And preparations began. By the start of 1348, a new fleet was under construction, and local officials had begun assessing towns and villages for the coming levy. It seemed as though full-scale war was about to resume. However, an apocalyptic twist of fate was about to ensure that this would never happen: the Black Death.
Oh yeah, the plague. Okay, so plague basically wiped out half of your population, like 60% of England's population, 55% of France's population. So you have half the peasants working in the field, half the nobles remaining. So that took a big toll on both sides.
The deadly Yersinia pestis, which previously decimated the Byzantine Empire from the 6th to 8th centuries, originated in Central Asia and in the early 14th century proliferated east and west on the medieval Silk Road until it reached the Golden Horde.
The Golden Horde was basically a remnant of the European Mongols.
Its Khan, Janibeg, besieged the Black Sea city of Kaffa in 1346, but the plague began annihilating his army, and he ordered that diseased corpses be catapulted into the city. By the time besieged Italian...
this was the first time this is one of the first times biological warfare was used, because if you're catapulting them on the walls, then you can spread the disease to the other people. And the more you catapult, then the more of them you can get rid from your side too. So that actually helped.
Citizens began fleeing west by sea to Europe. Most of them were infected or dying. First appearing in Italy.
Yeah, but the main issue with that idea was if the Genoese go back to their home area in Corsica and northern Italy, then with the merchants they can spread to all of Europe. So it was basically a double-edged sword, but might have actually worked in their favor a bit.
Italy, near the end of 1347, the nightmarish Black Death entered France through its thriving
Many believed that the disease was a divine punishment to win God's forgiveness. Some people urged their communities of heretics, and many thousands of Jews were massacred. So it's basically like the Holocaust where Jews are killed, but yeah.
Mediterranean ports, and then spread north like a wildfire until it reached England in mid-1348. It was the greatest demographic crisis in European history.
But some parts which are actually saved for like northern Scotland, which is much less deaths than the English, and Scandinavia, which was also a pretty safe place. Well, at least northern Scandinavia, like the area where Svalbard wasn't discovered yet, so we can't talk about that. But I'm talking about northern Norway, northern Sweden, modern northern Finland, somewhere there would be a safe place. Mostly.
Untold thousands perished.
But then people could have still spread it. But people didn't know about that area at the time. That's why it would be a safe place.
From the highest noble to the lowliest.
No one knew how to treat the disease. According to one doctor, instantaneous deaths, I can't pronounce that, deaths occurred when the ill spirit escaping from the eyes of the sick man strikes the healthy person standing near and looking at the sick.
Peasant farmer, the agrarian economy fell apart and the tax base collapsed. Overall, it is estimated that a third to half of Europe might have been killed by this first wave of the plague. many on the continent believed that the world itself was ending.
Yeah.
By 1350, the resulting shortage of men and money from the first plague wave stalled the war for the foreseeable future, as both realms tried to recover from the disaster. In late August of that year, King Philippe VI died, leaving the devastated
to John II, who is terrible and got captured and was sitting alongside King Edward with David of Scotland, who lived for a pretty long time.
Plague-ridden kingdom to his son, the Duke of Normandy, who took the throne as John II. If that wasn't bad enough, a fleet of French-allied Castilian mercenaries, which had been threatening Edward's trade with Flanders and link with Gascony, was beaten by the English at Winchelsea. With the exhaustion of both England and France, back-and-forth diplomacy was the order of the day, while at the same time Edward's countrymen continued to intervene in the ongoing small-scale action of the Breton Succession War. In 1353,
already the other two people had died, so they were replaced by the sons.
the English king announced that he was willing to abandon his claim to the French throne in return for all of Aquitaine, as his ancestors had ruled it, Normandy, and suzerainty over Flanders. John II accepted the terms at first, but reneged soon after, possibly having been playing for time. The war finally flared up again when England began correspondence with the maverick King of Navarre, Charles II the Bad, who, as a snubbed grandson of Louis X.
Okay. Navarre was an independent kingdom, yes. Ruled by the members of the cadet branch of the Capetian, yes. Louis X, grandson. The cadet branch was formed out of, basically, his father had created a new branch of the family. That's right. Charles II also held lands in France. Yes. He was a vassal of the French king. He held lands in, I believe, central France, Central or southern France, I can't remember.
Had an even greater claim to the French throne than Edward. Emboldened by his new English ally, Charles felt confident enough to act against a hated enemy, the Franco-Castilian Constable of France, Don Carlos de la Cerda. King John II had given him the great
Constable, Commander-in-Chief of the army appointed by,
county of Angoulême as a fief, lands which Charles considered his personal property. Hungry for vengeance, Charles had the constable lured into one of his own estates in Normandy, where the unfortunate victim was hacked to death.
And this hacking to death takes place in the future. With Jean the Fearless, he was hacked to death. There's a famous painting about that. Then there was, I believe it was the brother of Charles Shah VI the Mare, who was also hacked to death by John II, and then the brother of Shah, I believe his name was Louis, had a son also named Louis. Then he hacked John to death. So it was just a cycle of hacking people to death.
The Navarrese king then proudly proclaimed, "Know that it was I who, with God's help, killed Carlos of Spain." John II was furious that his favourite had been slain.
Spain also wasn't united. There were 4 kingdoms. There were actually 5 on the Iberian Peninsula, but Portugal wasn't a part of Spain per se, so we won't count that. So it was Castile, Aragon, Navarre was actually surprisingly there, but it was absorbed into Castile a few years later, and then the Emirate of Granada. And the Emirate of Granada actually was still around when Spain had unified. And then Queen Isabella, and I can't remember her husband's name. Why do I always forget? I'm not too good with ancient medieval history, like early modern, late medieval, so yeah. And both of them took over the Emirate of Granada. Please give me the name of her husband in the comments.
Slain, but that was overruled by his fear of encirclement by Edward III and a disgruntled ruler of Navarre with a good claim to the throne of France.
Yeah, this guy had a better claim than Edward. And if that happened, they'd most probably divide France. I mean, he'd get pretty much all of this northern bit, but he'd get all of this. So they could just divide France.
Aiming to resolve the dispute,
Yep.
the French and Navarrese kings made a tentative peace in 1355, but it was clear that Charles wasn't satisfied.
Yeah, he wasn't at all.
Seeking to take advantage, Edward III decided to resume military operations now that the worst effects of the plague had receded.
Yeah, in Scotland, the Scottish Islands were not affected, so the French could call on their Scottish allies to invade from the north. But yeah, you've lost half your soldiers. So now it makes the armies half small. So if you had 12,000 earlier, you have at maximum of about, at a minimum of about 4,000. And the maximum of the same 12,000, but that's rare.
Also at the start of the same year, prominent members of the Gascon nobility sailed north to attend the birth of their king's son, Thomas. They had brought bad news.
Yeah. Thomas was also given the dukedom of Gloucester, or was the dukedom of York? I believe it was Gloucester. And then that's what makes the Yorkist branch of the Wars of the Roses. And the Yorkist branch had much better claim. They were descended from actually two of Edward III's sons. So yeah, I think we'll dive into one of their videos on the War of the Roses shortly. I learned that there's one when I was trying to find this video to react to, like the first video. So yeah, we'll do that.
And asked for assistance. Ever since 1352,
While the French were
Edward's
greater.
hereditary lands in Gascony had been under continuous attack by the French king's lieutenant in the southwest, Count of Armagnac, Jean I. The incursions had made such progress that by May of 1354, Armagnac forces were encamped only a few days' march from the region's capital, Bordeaux.
And Armagnac also was absolutely decimated by Edward the Black Prince, who basically wiped out all the tax revenue from southern France. Basically, half of France is, I'd say maybe 40% of France's tax revenue was gone. So that hurt France's economy.
The understrength Gascons needed help, so the English king ordered his son, Edward of Woodstock, to raise an army and sail to southern France.
Edward of Woodstock was basically Edward the Black Prince.
The Black Prince and his 2,700 professional English troops arrived in Bordeaux in September 1355 and absorbed a further 4,000 Gascon reinforcements there.
Okay. And related to this, Edward the Black Prince, it's speculative on how the Black Prince got Black Prince nickname. Some people say it wore black armor. Some people say it got disease, which I actually agree with. And some people say that it wasn't even called the Black Prince during his reign, and there was just a name given to him after he died for the atrocities he committed, which were a lot after he got his disease. So I think it's a disease, but yes, let him go.
At about the same time, the French king ordered a general mobilization of forces. It wasn't in time to save the south of his kingdom. Around October 5th, the Black Prince's army departed Bordeaux on what would become known as one of the greatest chevauchées ever launched. Marching in 3 parallel columns to maximize destruction, the raiding force went 100 miles south before swinging east, crossing the River Gers and entering Armagnac territory. There, Edward's army began mercilessly slaughtering every living creature it came across, torching everything that would burn and smashing everything that wouldn't, to ensure that this land would not assist the French.
Yeah, and it didn't assist the French for like a decade after that. That's how bad he did. That's how bad for the French that was. And if Armagnac actually moved his troops north and encircled Edward, there was a chance that Edward the Black Prince could be captured, maybe executed, but they don't execute nobles, and also might have made the English war in France a lost cause.
War effort for years to come. His foe, the outnumbered Count of Armagnac, remained in fortified Toulouse as his enemy passed by, watching as they forded two nearby rivers and arrived at Carcassonne on November.
Yeah, but they could see it. They could see him. I mean, they were fording the area around the intersection, like the fork of the river. They're fording near them. Toulouse was pretty close, and they could see him.
November 2nd. That city attempted to bribe the Black Prince with 250,000 gold coins, but he responded by ravaging its suburbs before moving on, reaching Narbonne on the Mediterranean coast by the 8th. After desolating its entire outer city and agricultural hinterland, the Prince of Wales's army withdrew back towards Gascony, shadowed by, but not challenged by, two smaller French armies. Whilst only suffering minor casualties, this great raid had destroyed over 500 settlements, drastically reduced Jean II's tax revenue, and
as I said, it might have removed 30 to 40% of his tax revenue, which is almost half of it. Supposing you're making $100 of your small country's tax revenue, then you remove it, and you need $100 to live every year. They remove it, then you have twice less, and you tax more in the areas which are not affected, which leads them into revolt. So it's just an endless chain, which the French knew if that happened, they were dead for some time at least.
Doomed his military reputation. With his soldiers billeted along Gascony's northern marches, the Black Prince occupied the winter with administrative and governmental matters in the duchy, dealing with friendly feudals and internal disputes within the Gascon lands.
Yeah,
while he was doing this, both sides embarked on small-scale
and this looks like the Swiss border reversed with France, but yeah.
military expeditions, taking and retaking castles. The French are said to have retaken 30 fortifications during this time. The level of success that the first chevauchée enjoyed, and fresh reinforcements from England and from new allies in North Gascony, made it clear that a second assault into the French lands would be undertaken. The prince departed northeast from Bergerac with his army on August 4th, 1356, arriving first at Périgueux and then
And then here in this northern thing, you see the Battle of Poitiers taking place. In this northern chevauchée.
Ramefort, Brantôme, Quisse, Nontron, Rochechouart, and Le Terre, all within 10 days of setting off.
Yeah, and here's the town, Poitiers. This is where the battle is going to take place.
Despite once again leaving a swathe of destruction in its wake, when the Black Prince's army reached Bellec on August 16th, it was ordered to do no damage at all.
Yeah, because the owners of Bellec, the lords who ruled the city, were actually descendants of the English royal family. That's the only reason that didn't happen.
As it belonged to a noble related to the English royal family. After leaving Bellec, the English started to encounter more French resistance as the population began to fight back. Nevertheless, on the 24th, Edward reached Issoudun, but failed to take the fortified city, moving on after razing its suburbs. 4 days later, as the army was nearing Vierzon, a flying column of 200 raiders skirmished with a French reconnaissance party and took a few prisoners. From them, they learned that to the north, Jean II was rallying a massive army and was about to march against the Black Prince. To see why Jean had been delayed so much, we'll have to turn back the clock a bit to early 1356, where events in the north of France were considerably impacting the situation. Since his tenuous peace with the French king, Charles the Bad had managed to pry even more concessions from the monarch by intentionally spreading rumours that he was going to flee to Edward III, thereby...
Yeah, and then Charles II was hacked to death, I believe. He was hacked to death or captured and executed, I don't know. But yeah, that was one step too far. and he crossed the line.
Increasing Jean's desperation to keep him in line. However, this time the Navarrese king pushed his luck too far, as his amiability with the French Dauphin, Charles, made King Jean paranoid that they were plotting to overthrow him. So in April 1356, the French king stormed into Rouen with his men, beheaded 4 supposed conspirators, and imprisoned Charles. This led to an alliance between the latter's brother Philippe and the King of England, which in turn gave Jean the excuse he needed to confiscate Navarrese holdings in northern France. On July 12th, he began trying to take them by besieging the town of Breteuil, a move which locked the king in place, with greater threats materializing to the north and south, as the Black Prince was preparing another destructive chevauchée, while Normandy itself was invaded by Henry, Duke of Lancaster. This was designed to split French attention more than anything else, and after resupplying...
Yeah, and there was also one more main goal. The second main goal was to connect the 2 armies and split France. And then one of them attacks. Basically, they want to go near Orléans, somewhere there, and then split France. Both of them go take the west, then go at the east, and then win the war. That's what they were trying to do.
A few of Philip's besieged castles, Lancaster went to Poitiers in order to continue his distraction tactics. To his credit, at this critical juncture, King Jean II acted decisively. After a month of his pointless siege of Breteuil, he realized that events in the south desperately required his immediate attention, and concluded the siege.
Otherwise, they reach Orléans, then connect with Henry's army of Lancaster, and then fight a pitched battle where the numbers would actually be similar.
By paying the Navarrese to surrender. With that done, the Valois king marched to Chartres and called his nobles to service. The Prince of Wales learned of this during the 3 days his army remained in plundered Vierzon, and realized he was about to be chased.
And they don't.
Knowing that he had to get back to friendly territory as soon as possible, Edward immediately...
Then the Henry of Lancaster trying to move south, and they're very close to Orléans. If they both can get there, connect the armies, you have pretty similar amount of men. But Henry of Lancaster was 50 kilometers away, maybe 2-day march, 2 to 3 days. Well, Edward the Black Prince was maybe a day's march away, but John II was maybe 15 hours. So John II was closer than any of them. And that's the only reason they both didn't.
They started withdrawing west along the Cher River, but was delayed for 5 days in a siege at Romorantin, and a further 4 days waiting for the Duke of Lancaster's unsuccessful attempts to link up with him. All of this gave Jean's army the time it needed to catch up with the Black Prince's plunder-laden force.
All you need to do, Henry of Lancaster, is take your fort south, camp somewhere at this fort, then when Jean passes by, you chase Jean. Jean will have to fight a battle on 2 fronts, and you have a very high chance of winning if you do that, but they didn't think of that.
Forces, and by the time the latter reached La Haye, his army was only a day's march behind. Rather than coming up behind the English, Jean, using his better knowledge of the area, decided to remain east of the Vienne River and then cross at Chauvigny with a cavalry-heavy portion of his army. When the prince learned he'd been overtaken on the 16th, he tried to march off-road to evade Jean, but an encounter the next day between outriders at La Chaboterie made it clear there was no real chance of flight. The battle was inevitable.
The Battle of Poitiers.
Edward's army camped for the night in a nearby forest. They emerged the next day and seized a hilltop position about a mile in front of the French, who had spent the night camped in battle formation. Compared to the great medieval hosts which had done battle at Crécy a decade earlier, the armies facing off near Poitiers in late September 1356 were small, perhaps due to the effects of the plague and war exhaustion. Edward of Woodstock's previously retreating chevauchée army was
Edward the Woodstock's basically Edward the Black Prince. He was born in Woodstock. That was a common thing at the time to call the last name people where they were born. So Henry V was called Henry of Monmouth because he was born at Monmouth. Then Edward was called Edward of Woodstock. Edward III's son Thomas was called Edward of Thomas of Woodstock because he was also born at Woodstock. That's what they did.
Made up of just over 6,000 troops, 1,000 mainly spear-armed Gascon infantry, 3,000 English men-at-arms, including mounted knights and their squires, and just over 2,000 Anglo-Welsh longbowmen.
And that's odd. In the battles of Crecy and Agincourt, the longbowmen basically are half the army. But here they're only 1/3, which is still a lot. But still, I mean, surprisingly less compared to the other two battles. Normally, the longbowmen would have maybe 3,000 and then the men-at-arms would have 2,000, but surprisingly less.
Wielding their infamous ranged weapons.
Yep.
These troops were divided into 3 mixed divisions of 1,500 soldiers.
Sir James Audley, Thomas Earl of Warwick, Edward the Black Prince, and William Earl of Salisbury.
Each on the left, right, and in the centre, while about 1,000 remained in a rearguard reserve. Opposite him, the French king's magnificent army had 3,000 infantry and 8,000 mounted knights, but the majority.
And again, they didn't learn the lesson with the mountain knights thing. They didn't learn the lesson about what happened to Crecy. But they did learn one thing, not to charge straight the English. But they didn't learn that they should use footed, like knights which are fighting on foot, not on horseback. So they had about 11,000 and a few archers.
Were ordered to dismount due to Jean's fear.
John II, Philip Duke of Orleans, Dauphin Charles would who would become Charles V, Jean de Clement, and Arnaud. I know I'm literally butchering the names trying to speak a French accent. Daughter.
Of a second Crecy taking place. Only an elite contingent of several hundred remained on their steeds. The French cavalry and crossbowmen were on the right.
Yeah, they purposely let the horses be, but only 700 were on their horses. But just in case required, they had horses with them. They could use them.
Commanded by Marshal Arnauld d'Audriem, while manning the left were some Franco-German cavalry and more missile units under Marshal Jean de Clement. The majority of dismounted knights and peasant infantry were arrayed in 3 central lines of battle, one in front of the other. They were led, from front to back, by Charles Dauphin of France, Philippe, Duke of Orleans, and King Jean II himself, respectively. As the two armies faced off, a French cardinal rode to the Black Prince, begging him to listen, and was met with the frosty response, "Say it quickly then, this is no time for a sermon." The prelate argued for a peace for the sake of all the Christian lives.
They would not want peace if they were fighting Muslims. They want peace if they're fighting Christians only. And to his respect for the guy who was trying to kill, he actually wanted peace, and this was no delaying offer. He actually hoped that Edward would agree to peace so that, well, nothing would happen to any more Christian lives. Oh, and there was also a small cavalry contingent at this battle. Every battle had at least a small cavalry bit in it,
which would be wasted should the battle break out. Despite his hostility, the prince was still anxious about fighting a pitched battle and was willing to make significant concessions. Unfortunately, Jean II demanded
unconditional surrender. And that means you surrender your army, surrender yourself, no matter what.
Additional surrender, and so battle became the only way out. As the French commanders Audriem and Clement surveyed the English position, they saw an unusual amount of movement and believed the enemy to be retreating. It was in fact probably an intentional ruse. Not willing to let the enemy get away, Audrième charged with his cavalry towards Warwick's left, while Clermont reluctantly took the same action, heading towards Salisbury's right. The former's well-armoured knights and horses initially resisted English arrow fire and crashed into the English infantry, inflicting significant damage on the first line. However, when longbowmen advanced up the riverbank anchoring their left wing and began to loose volley after volley into Audrième's flank, the attack turned into a massacre. French knights were either felled by arrows, crushed by their own steeds, or routed, while the marshal himself was made a prisoner. On the other side of the field, Clermont's horsemen charged up the ridge towards Salisbury's division, but were funneled into a narrow open section in the hedge protecting the English line. There, the bunched-up cavalry suffered terrible losses before breaking through, and when they did, they were engaged by Salisbury's dismounted knights. After a fierce clash, the French were thrown back. The French
and Clermont was also killed at that charge. So that means your two command shots, and one's also captured. So now you only have the nobleman.
Infantry vanguard under the Dauphin followed behind in good order along the entire front. However, they too were forced to funnel themselves through the hedge's gaps, and many were killed by devastating arrow fire whilst doing so. Those who broke through met the Anglo-Gascon men-at-arms in vicious hand-to-hand fighting, which lasted 2 hours, but they were finally pushed back with heavy losses and nothing to show for it. As the Dauphin's forces had been defeated, King John II ordered that his son be escorted from the field in case of a disaster, but it turned out...
Yeah, the only reason he wanted that is just in case he gets killed at the battle. At least he has an heir, and France, he can prevent civil war basically. But then when that happens, Philippe de Orléans, who is the guy I was thinking about when I told about Louis, who was hacked to death, he also thought that the French army would be retreating, and he went along. So that only left Jean's contingent, which
to be a disastrous move. The Dauphin's withdrawal convinced the Duke of Orléans, who led the second line of infantry, to leave the battlefield with the troops in that formation as well. Advancing with a battle axe in hand, John II led the largest and final division, crossbowmen in front and infantry behind, up the ridge towards the English. With the Black Prince's archers running out of arrows, the French king's contingent closed with the English almost unscathed, with his most elite knights and the fresh 3rd Division outnumbering the nevertheless stubborn and...
They could have won. The French could have won if Philippe de Orléans hadn't retreated. Since he retreated, then yeah, that made numbers more of a similarity. Like now these guys could also just get any weapon they found from their Englishmen and use it. So yeah. So if he hadn't ordered his son to retreat, they would have won.
And high morale army of the prince. When the archers ran out of arrows, they left their positions and took up swords, knives and axes, joining their comrades in the melee. At the combat's fiercest moment, the Captal de Buch gathered 200 reserve cavalry and led them in a wide swinging arc around to the French rear.
Is known for being the best cavalry commander of the 100 Years' War. I'd say that about him. He was a really good cavalry commander.
He raised the flag of St. George and then charged at Jean's rear ranks. Seeing this, the Black Prince withdrew some of his dismounted knights from the line, mounted them, and had an impetuous knight called Sir James Audley lead them to crash into the other French flank. The remnant of Jean's army scattered in every direction, a significant portion of them towards a marsh called the Champ d'Alexandre, where the English longbowmen slew many of them. In the chaos, the King of France was surrounded by enemy soldiers who demanded his surrender. He refused to give himself up to common soldiers, but then the Earl of Warwick rode through and formally took Jean prisoner. All in all, While the English suffered minimal losses,
About
probably around
1,000.
100 or two,
Yeah,
the French had lost at least 2,500 dead,
Basically,
including
French.
Clermont and many other nobles.
Clermont was
Around 3,000 were also taken prisoner, including the French king himself, who was led to the Black Prince with full medieval honor. France suffered another disaster, and now it's...
And at the time, the English were actually speaking French, so they could understand the French well. It was only under the time of maybe just, yeah, they were speaking both English and French in the court. So at the time of that, they could easily understand what King Jean was saying.
king was hostage. However, the 100 Years' War was just beginning, so make sure you're subscribed and have pressed the bell button to see the next video in the series.
Yeah, this is the War of the Roses thing which I would want to do sometime, and maybe the Third Crusade. But yeah, Kings and Realms has a lot of good videos which I plan to get into soon. Okay, guys, so yeah, thanks for watching, and on Saturday I'll be doing a live stream at 6 o'clock for the 7-month anniversary of my channel. And yeah, so thanks for watching and see you next time. Bye.